That ends my introductions. Why don't we begin our program now? Why don't we start with Matt Prindiville, the Executive Director of Upstream.
Thanks, Maurice. Can everybody hear me? Great. And I hope you can all see my screen. All right, excellent. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Let me just start by thanking Neil and Rebecca and Maurice and all the folks at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance for pulling this webinar together and for all the incredible work that you guys have done on recycling issues over the years. Let me also just thank everybody that joined the webinar today for taking a beautiful afternoon out of your August to come learn about these issues. And I'm looking forward to this webinar. I'm really glad to be here with all of you today. So before I get started, just a few quick words about Upstream. We are a national environmental policy organization working to build a circular economy here in the United States. And what that means is that we're working to build an economy where products and packaging are designed to be reused and recycled into the products of tomorrow, so that we're stewarding all the natural resources and energy that we take from the planet. And a big part of how we do that is by promoting extended producer responsibility policies, which essentially mean that if you make something, you need to take responsibility for the environmental and social impacts of that product. And I know we've got an educated audience, and Maurice did a great job with the introduction, so I'm going to move right on to the meat of my presentation here. Now, to start, I want to lay out why this matters for Upstream. And for us, as I mentioned, the purpose of our organization is to help build a cradle-to-cradle economy here in the U.S. And we promote this biological and technical nutrient model that's been laid out by McDonough and Braungart, so that all of our stuff eventually goes to feed the creation of technical products like cell phones, or goes to feed bacteria as compost for farms, or the creation of bio-based products, so technical nutrients and biological nutrients. And for us, EPR for packaging is a tool to help achieve a cradle-to-cradle economy, so that the vast majority of packaging gets utilized, instead of the situation today where the majority gets wasted or littered. Now, for us, there's a clear rationale for why we need some form of EPR, and it stems from shared values around recycling and materials management. Everyone from city recycling coordinators to packaging suppliers to even the most cynical representatives from consumer brands wants to boost packaging recycling. And the good news is that we know how to do this. You know, numerous reports have been issued from the top research firms showing that a variety of policy tools, including universal cart-based curbside recycling, statewide pay-as-you-throw, away-from-home collection infrastructure, financial incentives, investments in MRFs, et cetera, can all dramatically increase recycling and prevent litter, especially if they are pursued together. Now, the bad news is that many of these ideas cost money. And in addition, with the exception of a few commodities like aluminum, nearly all of the other packaging materials, it costs more to collect them than you can get from selling the scrap. And the other issue is that most local governments are too cash-strapped to invest in recycling. So funding for recycling and litter cleanup competes with the funding needs for police and fire protection, for schools and other essential municipal services. On the business side, the waste management and recycling companies will only invest in recycling infrastructure if it will clearly improve their bottom line, and typically they need inked contracts with local governments to do so. Again, those are the same parties that are unwilling or unable to invest in recycling. So the bottom line is that increasing recycling requires that somebody picks up the tab. So given these on-the-ground realities, EPR can be seen as a way to get the consumer goods companies that put all this packaging in the marketplace to pay their fair share for sustainably managing it. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we've been and how we got involved in EPR for packaging. Now, for us, the original EPR bills in the United States are our nation's container deposit laws. And at Upstream, we've been ardent bottle bill supporters and defenders, which is why when a major beverage company, and a bottled water company at that, decided to support and promote EPR for packaging back in 2011, we were extremely skeptical. As a matter of fact, one of the very first things I did when I joined Upstream 4 years ago was to write a project plan and grant proposal to keep Nestle Waters from co-opting EPR and hijacking our efforts. However, looking back, I believe this was a significant watershed moment. For the first time, a major consumer goods company had admitted that they bore some financial responsibility for increasing the recycling of their packaging, and that all other consumer goods companies should share that same responsibility. And I think you can be completely suspect of their motives because Nestle's repeatedly opposed bottle bills, which are proven strategies of getting their containers back. This still represents a fundamental shift in corporate culture, this idea of switching financial responsibility for recycling and the stewardship of packaging away from local governments upstream to producers. And as many of you know, beginning in 2011, Nestle sponsored a 16-month dialogue with a number of business and government interests and several public interest groups, including upstream. And they provided seed money and ongoing funding to start an organization called Recycling Reinvented, which invested considerable resources to build support for EPR for packaging from brands, domestic manufacturers, and waste and recycling companies over the last 3 years. Now, initially, as I mentioned, we were completely opposed to this process and joined this dialogue to determine how we could fight what we saw as an attempt to co-opt EPR by powerful corporate interests. But what was interesting is that the dialogue created a remarkable exchange of ideas up and down the supply chain and really helped to launch a serious policy discussion around recycling in the U.S., maybe something that we haven't really even seen since the 90s. The turning point came for us when Recycling Reinvented asked us to weigh in on their draft model bill. And we anticipated that the bill would be 1 step forward and 2 steps back. However, upon reading it, we found that we generally agreed with more of the bill than we opposed. And the bill had some solid input from state and local governments, so we took it upon ourselves to assemble public interest group feedback, which came in the form of the Cradle 2 packaging platform, where we led a process to develop principles to help guide the development and implementation of EPR legislation in the United States. Now, in 2013, we worked with Recycling Reinvented, the Natural Resources Defense Council, Clean Water Action, the Conservation Law Foundation, and many local stakeholders on EPR legislation for packaging in Rhode Island. And after a very successful public hearing, the sponsor pulled the bill in order to iron out some core issues to win broader support. Now, that same year, we played a minor role in supporting NRDC and California advocates in developing and advancing an EPR for packaging bill, which would have made the producers of products which have a high tendency to end up as plastic pollution responsible not just for recycling, but for litter prevention and mitigation as well. In 2014, we simultaneously supported efforts to advance a new bottle bill and get EPR for packaging heard in Minnesota. But during the 2014 legislative session, and in multiple dialogues leading up to it, it was clear that we did not have the support from enough critical stakeholders to advance these bills. Now, the opposition from consumer brands and their trade associations was massive, and they were highly successful in recruiting local business associations like the state and regional chambers of commerce to join their cause. So politically, in order to overcome this juggernaut of entrenched opposition, we knew we needed to grow a huge big tent coalition in targeted states to win. And this challenge was compounded by the fact that we were in disagreement with Nestle and Recycling Reinvented over some significant policy issues in the legislation. Now, our wake-up call on strategy occurred during a 2014 EPR forum that we co-organized with an organization called Future 500, involving brands, packaging suppliers, the waste and recycling industry, government representatives, and NGOs. And while there was general agreement that some form of product stewardship was needed for packaging, there was not much agreement over what it should look like. Now, first, although several consumer goods companies were beginning to understand and admit that they bore some responsibility for the packaging they put in the marketplace, these corporations were never going to step forward voluntarily and assume major new obligations. And it was painfully clear to us at that point that the bedrock partners that we needed to overcome opposition from consumer brands, namely local governments and the waste and recycling industry, were not on board, primarily because of a legitimate concern around loss of control over recycling systems to powerful consortiums of corporate interests. And a lot of the controversy resulted from the 100% producer-financed and controlled recycling system in the Recycling Reinvented bill and the massive power shift inherent in this approach. More on this later here. So in the summer of 2014, we went back to the drawing board and organized a dialogue of local government officials with a background on EPR issues in targeted states. And after we closed that dialogue and released a draft discussion paper, we organized a dialogue with key players in the waste and recycling industry, which we closed at the beginning of the summer. As part of this process, we conducted multiple surveys to get an understanding of where stakeholders were at and to identify the core issues. Now, both the local governments and waste and recycling industry participants thought that some form of product stewardship or EPR for packaging was needed, about 82% and 77% respectively. And to begin both dialogues, we asked both groups what their top goals were for EPR and what problems they believed EPR could help solve, essentially asking, why do we need EPR? And also what their top concerns were around EPR implementation in an attempt to understand the roadblocks from their perspective. Now, the results from both parties were startlingly similar. Here are the top goals for EPR for packaging from local governments. And as you can see, they're interested in shifting some or all of the costs for collection and recycling upstream to producers. That management responsibility may in part shift. They were more clear about wanting to shift more of the costs, not as clear about the management responsibility. They saw the EPR could help significantly increase recycling rates for most materials. They wanted to make sure that the oversight remained in the hands of state and local governments. They wanted to see improvement in packaging design, and they wanted brand owners to be partners in market development and funding advancements in MRFs so that they could process more materials and process more of the hard-to-handle and difficult-to-recycle materials, and of course providing funding for robust education and outreach. Now here's the same question asked to the recycling businesses, and again, the results are very similar. They're looking for recycling system optimization, sustainable funding and investment in recycling over the long term, increasing recycling rates and the overall system performance, and again, looking for design and innovation, helping to provide feedback to the parties that design and market stuff around design change. So lots of similarities here. Now regarding concerns around EPR implementation, the results were also strikingly in alignment. Here were the top concerns from local governments. And again, number one is the big one, too much producer control. I mean, we heard this again and again during this dialogue. Number two, the need for local governments and haulers to be involved in the planning and management of any prospective EPR system. A big concern about costs being pushed downstream and the powerful producer consortiums essentially not being, not fairly compensating local governments for the services they provide, and also concern about any stranded assets that might be hanging out there. There was some concern about whether or not the transition, if we transition to a weak EPR system, we wouldn't get the results that these same folks are hoping for. And also some worries that the EPR system would preempt local governments from taking stronger action. And also this concern about incineration. Would producers want to incinerate the lower value packaging materials instead of looking for ways to recycle them, to find markets to recycle them? Again, same questions asked to recycling business. Notice number one, again, the exact same thing, too much control by brand owners. This was this was the number one issue that came up in both of these dialogues. And again, very similar issues around perverse incentives and structural concerns, wanting to make sure that the EPR system would work with the existing infrastructure. And then number four was an interesting one. There was really this concern that in order to win, it would be necessary to get industry and environmental groups to agree on a framework, and that there's a lot of questions as to the political viability of that actually happening. So as you can see, the big issues revolve around money and control. And this has been our discussions with other key constituencies as well. Most of the stakeholders in the recycling supply chain, the local governments, the collectors, the processors, end users, and many of the packaging suppliers, they want the increased investment that would come from producer fees to optimize the recycling systems where they operate. However, they're not interested in losing control over the recycling system to consumer brands, which would be the case in a 100% producer-financed and controlled system, such as the new model in British Columbia or most of the European EPR systems. So to that end, a shared responsibility approach, which balances the investment from producer fees on packaging and taxpayer or ratepayer funding with shared control among key stakeholders, may be the key to making EPR work politically here in the United States. And so in the spring of 2015, we developed a model bill with stakeholders to accomplish this. And our shared responsibility for packaging bill would create a sustainable packaging trust, which would receive funds from the producers of packaging. And that trust would be used toward achieving a 75% recycling rate. Now and we'd also would stipulate that there'd be interim recycling rates for each of the individual commodities as well. So we're driving performance across the entire system and not just having producers be able to meet this big target by collecting a whole bunch of heavy materials like paper. The trust would be administered by a newly created sustainable packaging authority, and for those states that already have something that, like a waste management authority, this could be integrated into those existing duties. The SPA would be governed by a consortium of producers, local governments, recycling and waste management companies, end users and manufacturers, and statewide environmental NGOs. And the authority would use the funds from the trust to enhance and improve collection and recycling infrastructure, compensate municipalities for the costs of handling packaging, conduct outreach and education, invest in MRFs, invest in litter prevention and plastics capture, and a host of other proven strategies to both boost recycling and prevent litter. So in short, the ABCs of the bill are that the Model Shared Responsibility Bill creates a trust to receive producer funds. Those funds are managed by a diverse group of stakeholders, all of representing people all up and down the supply chain, and the funds are invested in strategies to boost recycling and prevent litter. Now, before I finish here, let me just start by addressing some of the criticism for this model, and also to briefly talk about the pros and cons of the 100% producer financed and controlled model. Now, there's a lot to like about this 100% producer financed and controlled model of EPR. The model essentially says that packaging waste is now the complete responsibility of the companies that put packaging into the marketplace, with all the liabilities and all the benefits that come with this level of responsibility and control. If recycling rates are low or if packaging winds up in the environment, we know who to hold accountable. On the flip side, consumer goods companies have the freedom to determine their own fate and can organize a recycling system across a jurisdiction to achieve efficiencies and economies of scale that local governments in a more disconnected system cannot. Now, this model has clearly led to high packaging recycling rates in the jurisdictions where it's been pursued. Now, but this level of reorganization comes with a cost, and that's usually to the existing companies, large and small, that currently conduct packaging recycling within a given jurisdiction. Winners and losers can be chosen by the producers, creating havoc with existing markets and market participants. Similarly, if local governments want to reap the benefits of having producers pay the full costs for recycling, they have to give up control over the recycling systems that they've built from scratch over the last 30 years. And these two fundamental issues are the main reason why we believe that the 100% producer financed and controlled EPR system is a political non-starter in the United States. So whether or not somebody might think that this is a better system in the long haul, there is no way that this model will win the political support to move forward in the United States, at least not for now. Now, with the shared responsibility approach, there's legitimate criticism that when responsibility is shared with local government service providers, producers can blame failure to achieve results on inefficient government programs. Some might argue that this is little more than a tax on producers and that there's little to no producer self-determination to create a system that can achieve efficiencies and economies of scale to boost recycling rates and lower system costs. In many ways, this approach is more messy than the 100% producer financed and controlled model because there are a lot more economic relationships and details to sort out. And in this way, a shared responsibility EPR system functions much more like a regulated utility than a free market system. Now, we recognize that this is not a perfect model and that some may want to draw parallels with the problems associated with Ontario's 50-50 shared responsibility model. But we see some form of this model as the way to move forward in the United States. And our model bill creates a mechanism for consumer goods companies to help pay for the stewardship of the packaging they put in the marketplace. The monies are managed and the responsibility shared by a diverse group of stakeholders representing each part of the packaging and recycling supply chains. Their purview is to boost recycling and prevent litter through investment improvement strategies to do so. This model does not upend existing business relationships between local governments and the waste and recycling industry. It does not require local governments to hand over control of their recycling programs to producer consortiums. In many ways, it's very similar to Delaware's universal recycling law, which has used beverage industry funds to build a more unified and effective statewide recycling system through shared responsibility over those funds by a board of stakeholders. Except that instead of a sunset period on producer funds, which is what's happening in Delaware right now, the funding would continue in perpetuity. And while it doesn't go far enough for some, it provides a politically viable path forward in the United States and more broadly represents the interests of the key stakeholders that will be necessary to have on board to win. So in conclusion, this work to date has had a remarkable ripple effect, even among the entrenched positions of consumer brands. I like to say that 2014 was the year that corporate America finally got its wake-up call on recycling with the announcement of voluntary product stewardship efforts like the the Closed Loop Fund, and the Recycling Partnership. And we feel that these are direct results from the 4 years of advocacy around EPR issues here in the United States. Now, unfortunately, up until now, the U.S. EPR packaging debate has been bogged down in debates and discussions around the relevance with and problems around foreign EPR models, the fear of loss of control by local governments and recycling businesses, and the pursuit of winnable policies on the business side to get additional corporate support. And what was lost in this debate was the incredible opportunity that's now on the table. And since corporate America has admitted that they bear some responsibility for recycling their packaging, it's up to local governments, public interest groups, and recycling businesses to determine how much responsibility they bear and how that responsibility should be implemented. So our advice to all of you is, don't waste this opportunity. Let's stop wasting time, discussing British Columbia or waste incineration in the EU, and let's roll up our sleeves and focus on the incredible opportunities to gain from increased investment in recycling and litter prevention infrastructure from the consumer goods companies that should be paying their fair share. So thanks so much for having me here today, and I really look forward to the questions and answers. Thanks again.
Thanks, Matt.